Hello, and welcome to another World of UX podcast. This is your host, Darren Hood. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. Welcome, a special welcome as always to those of you joining us for the first time. Today, we're going to play the conclusion of my Talkin Shop session with author Harry Max, the author of Managing Priorities. This is a fantastic set. You don't get to meet some of these folks sometimes that were in the background, folks that were doing things that were critical to the discipline in the early days that a lot of folks just don't know about. He has so many insightful things to say. But folks, we're going to dive right in. I also want to let you know we're going to back up just a little bit. So we're going to play a little bit of the end of last week's segment just to help people get some context. And then we're going to continue on from there. So enjoy the conclusion of the set with Harry Max. It's amazing. And UX is about becoming a master of priorities.
Yeah, that's right.
Even when sometimes there's something we want to do. I mean, I was always taught when I was coming up in UX, and I spent my first 10 years as a freelancer. I had my own business in the evening doing part-time work. I got in 1995, didn't get my first full-time UX gig until 2005. Didn't make a decision to go after it until 2002, 2003. And then now we're in this situation where I've got things, they're blowing my mind, the different things that are going on. But I learned, pick your battles. And that's about prioritization. You can't, every recommendation is not going to be put in place. And as much as we might love what we do, for those of us that do love what we do, we still don't, we own the user experience, and everybody doesn't understand that we own the user experience, but we still can't make people do what we recommend. So we have to prioritize. Right. And sometimes, okay, this battle, I think this would be best for users. I have data that proves that this would be the best way to go for users, but people simply aren't going to buy into it. And so that prioritization has to kick in at that point. And we have to, okay, wave the white flag there or come up with some type of a compromise. We have to be good at that. Prioritization is so key. And I want to reinforce that for those who are listening to this and wondering, when you see the topic, what this has to do with UX, it has everything to do with UX. Which is why I've really a lot lately, I've started to really stress the fact that UX is actually a moniker. It's really a name that we're using to refer to this host of strategies that we engage in. UX it's not one thing.
That's right.
I even have a t-shirt line now, really a merchandise line that it revolves around UX is not UI. UX is not equal to UI. And as soon as people think that UX is just this one thing, they're completely missing the mark. I was working on a project and somebody said, well, everything we're doing right now is just a facelift. And I went, no, it's not a facelift. I'm looking at task flows. I'm looking at reducing cognitive load. I'm looking at optimizing accessibility. I'm looking at making sure that we're generating and fostering brand trust and brand goodwill. You think this is a facelift? Oh,
that's right.
No.
Well, and to this point, I mean, a very subtle point here, but when I was designing virtual vineyards, I mean, this is 1994, I was doing that design work, right? Mm-hmm. What was key to me was the perception of security.
Wow. Yes.
I'm like, there's no such thing as actual security on the internet and the nascent World Wide Web. So this is about conveying trust and trustworthiness. It's about perception of security. You can't facelift that. It has to be built into everything.
Yes. And I'm going, no, you will not cheapen what we do. No. Yeah. No, I would not allow that. And I'm also reminded, and I'll make this quick, we get to the next one here, that every meeting, whether it's an internal meeting or a meeting with external clients and stakeholders, every meeting is an opportunity to drive UX maturity. And when people share a misconception, then there has to be, we have to prioritize immediately. We have to make that a high priority. I need to plant a seed to help drive the maturity. And if I've already planted the seed, and now I need to water it at that point in time, because if we miss the opportunities in every meeting, every presentation, every input that a UXer has into a meeting that maybe we're not even running, it's an opportunity to drive that UX maturity. Otherwise, people are going to they are going to limit themselves to perceiving that UX is just about facelifts, it's just about aesthetics, and really, it's not at all. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, we got to drive that message home today. Next point. This was something I don't even know how I found this one, but I was plugging around and I'm doing some digging, and I noticed that you have a template that you created on Miro, and we have a lot of Miro, not Miro, Miro, not sponsored. I always have to tease. Some people like to say that when they mention brand names. I like both products, by the way. But you have a template on Miro. It's called the Max Priorities Framework. Some people love frameworks. They love processes. Well, tap into this one. And there was something else associated with this. There's an acronym DGAP. And I purposely didn't dig into what DGAP stands for because I'm going to ask you to address this. But it features the DGAP approach. Can you talk for a few minutes about what DGAP is and what this framework that you're presenting on Miro offers them? And I know there's a connection to the book. So
Yeah, let me just step back and do a little bit of context here because I think it'll be helpful. The book is broken up into 3 parts, right? The first part of the book is short. It basically says you have to prioritize prioritization. You have to make priorities a first-class citizen. If you don't, you're going to wish you had.
Yep.
Part 2 of the book is basically the process model. I didn't invent DGAP. DGAP is an acronym that stands for DEGAP, and I will describe each of those in turn momentarily. Don't you worry. And that process model, I discovered that all prioritization efforts, all of them, every single one, follow those process steps.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, I liken it to the best example I can come up with is animation. I worked in an animation studio. I worked on, I was not an animator like you. I ran the intranet team at PDI DreamWorks. PDI stands for Pacific Data Images. It was a company that DreamWorks SKG purchased. That was where the really nitty gritty, hardcore 3D animation was happening, was in the Redwood City PDI studio. So PDI DreamWorks, and it eventually became DreamWorks Animation. And what I learned there was that animation is not about just making a character's arm go up and down or making them smile. Animation is a very rich process model of steps that are represented in an animation studio like DreamWorks or Pixar by departments. And it starts with a story and it ends with a digital, an 88 or 90-minute pixel perfect digital representation of that animation. And everything in between that follows a step that requires that different people do different things. If you skip any of those steps, you get results which are worse than you would have otherwise gotten. And in PDI's case, there's a good chance no movie would happen. For prioritization, turns out there are 5 repeatable steps. You have to decide if you're going to do it.
Okay.
You've got to engage in the process. You've got to gather the items you're going to prioritize and information about them. You have to arrange them in a sensible way. And then you have to execute the prioritization pattern. And I dedicate a chapter to each of those because it sounds super simplistic. And in fact, it is. If you don't have time to prioritize, decide not to, move on, do the thing you need to do, right? Let's say you decide you're going to do it. Okay, you need to engage in the process, figure out who your stakeholders are, figure out what information you need, figure out, what matters to you, go through that Roseanne pattern that we talked about earlier. Then go gather those items and gather the metadata and gather the criteria. Start kicking around how you might evaluate these things. Then clean it up, arrange it, deduplicate things, clarify things, figure out what is the most effective way that I should prioritize with a framework, a sorting technique, a marketplace simulation, or whatever, and then actually prioritize.
Mhm.
So that's DGAP. It's a 5-stage process. It's super simple on some level. And, avoid any of those steps at your own peril. Uh,
Right.
the last part of the book really takes P in DGAP, prioritize, and says, all right, enough joking around. If you're going to do it for yourself, by yourself, what does that look like? Or if you're going to lead or participate on a team that's prioritizing, what does that look like? Or if you're in a larger organization, how do you think about that? And so the last part of the book kind of goes into that and then tries to tie all of it together so that you're constantly looping through. Look, we need to make priorities a first class citizen. We have to prioritize prioritization. We have to run a repeatable process. We've got to know who we're doing it for and why. And we've got to basically be intentional about it.
Mhm.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And I
All
love
right.
that icing on the cake at the end. One of the things that I spend a lot of time talking on the show about from time
Mhm.
to time, talking to my mentees, talking to my students, is if you want to be excellent, number one, I have a rule: if you touch it, be excellent at it. Number one. Number two, if you're gonna, why waste time? If you're gonna be excellent, you have to be deliberate. So when I hear the word
Yes,
intentional, I think about being deliberate. So
that's right.
make a decision, recognize what you have to do, and then be deliberate about executing on that. I mean, if you want to grow corn, then get the corn and get busy. You know what you need
Yeah,
to do to accomplish that, and that same principle that it takes to grow that corn, all those little things, be it breaking up the ground, making sure to plant the seeds deep enough, making sure to fend off critters, watering on a regular. The same growth that we experience in every aspect of our life takes that same type of deliberation.
that's
Being
exactly right.
yeah, got to be intentional. If we're not intentional, we'll experience some degree of success. But if we want to excel, then we have to be deliberate. We have to be intentional. And that's why I'm also big on, I don't like the whole fake it till you make it mindset. And I have a blog post
Right.
about that. And I said that energy is wasted. It takes less effort to actually do things the right way. So why would you not just be deliberate and do things the right way? Because you're going to put effort somewhere.
That's
Why
right.
not? Why not do it in something that you know you're going to cash in on?
Right. And that's why the series of chapters on DGAP start with the idea that you have to go slow to go
Yes.
fast.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yes.
Right. You go
Yes.
slow at first because there's that idea that if you're slow and smooth about it, you can become really, really quick and accurate with it later when it becomes muscle memory.
Yep.
And the trick, kind of the mental trick with DGAP is it's always about closing a gap between an as is current state
Hmm.
and a to be desired state, whether that's an emergency medical situation, whether it's a product design and development or UX situation, whether it's planning a vacation,
Yep.
right? There's an as is current state, you've got a to be desired state. You need to get rid of the gap, D
Yep.
gap.
Love it. Love that. And that's for people who miss that. It's not just an acronym. It's actually that is a word. We definitely want to consider that. Man,
And
yeah.
I will tell you, let me rudely interrupt you for a minute. It took me some work to get the Gap, the company, to allow me to trademark that.
Yeah, that's fine. Oh my goodness. Yes. Wonderful stuff. And I tell people too, I'm reminded how often I mention this. I mention this on the show. I mention this when I'm talking to people, that we have allowed things like microwaves to change our thinking, and we
Mhm.
want everything too fast. And things that are obtained too fast are people discover that they're not legitimately sustainable. It takes time to lay a foundation to build a house.
That's right.
It takes time, and some people they want to. I had a actually on last week's a show that I did recently last week because I recorded it last week, but there was someone was posting about how they knew that they were being impatient about trying to get um a promotion,
Mhm.
in UX. And I'm going, that's not a good thing. You definitely want to be patient. You don't want to get promotions really, really fast because you're going to end up getting something and you're not going to be able to sustain it. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to that will talk about how they did get a promotion really, really quickly, and they rose through the ranks really, really quickly. But when you talk to them behind closed doors, they usually lack confidence. They have very difficult time sort of representing themselves in an extremely proper
Mm.
and a solid light because of that lack of confidence. It sort of erodes. It eats at a person's character and their ability to really stand firm about different things. But when you take your time and grow like a tree instead of like a weed, it's it's something that
Well, I mean, you bring up a very interesting point, and I'm going to bring it right back around to the prioritization pyramid, right,
Mhm.
which you can get on Miro. And the reason they got it and Mural did not was because they asked, right? They came to me and said, "We'd like to
Nice.
interview you about your method. We'd like to have a framework that is really yours, and we'd like to help people understand how to use it." And that framework is distinctly mine, and I share it with everybody. You know, it's Creative Commons. You're welcome to use it.
Mhm.
But to bring it around to what you're saying, that pyramid is based on multiple time horizons, right? The base of the pyramid, which I call get your house in order. The top of the pyramid, I call create your future. In the middle of the pyramid, I call reinforcing the foundation for growth. Now, you
Mhm.
can label those time horizons anything you want, but they are directly related to what you're talking about here, which
Mhm.
is it is absolutely crucial to understand in the first time horizon, which is the now domain, what matters most across whatever categories are relevant, right? It might be new features, it might be process and automation, it might be who knows. And the pyramid accounts for these different categories. And each of these time horizons and the transition from each time horizon allows you to apply different criteria, right? Because the time horizon for what you want to do now may have criteria that say, don't create more problems for ourselves in the future.
Mhm.
Whereas the criteria for the future might be don't deceive yourself into thinking that you can do something without laying the groundwork, right? So you can, the pyramid
Yes.
is
Yes.
it's very powerful and very simple, but it does build on the notion of needing a foundation,
Mhm.
establishing it, making sure it's robust, and building on top of it to achieve what it is you want.
Wonderful. Wonderful stuff. Two more questions.
Yes.
And one of them is geared toward people who are, I just talked about people who get getting promotions, getting their senior UX gig. I've been seeing a lot of people with 2 and 3 years, 4 years of experience being promoted into director roles. And I know somebody who ended up in a position like that, knew somebody directly, actually worked for the individual. And the one thing that I loved about this person who knew that he got a position too soon, but he knew that and he immediately sought to do things to make himself viable.
Mhm.
He was always digging into information, reading things that would help him to be a good leader. He got the position too soon. They sort of thrust him into it. He didn't expect it. If my memory serves me correctly, he did not expect that at all, but they did, and he took it. But he didn't just take it and run with it, and then go and cash his check and go make snow angels in the living room. He with all the cash he was getting, he really was trying to be a genuinely good and a respectful leader.
Mhm.
When it comes to prioritization, and you've been in a lot of these different leadership roles, and I couldn't help but think about this. What types of recommendations do you have for people who are seeking to optimize and enhance their leadership skills and organizational effectiveness? I know you've done talks about this type of thing in the past, so it's sort of tapping into that aspect of your background here.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's once again, it's a great question. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do justice to it, but I think it starts with something as simple as humility, right? You know, and I think it moves from
Yep.
really having a sense of humility and then the curiosity that comes out of that humility
Hmm.
to uh, adopting an ownership oriented mindset, which is to say, you have to anticipate things, you have to look at the OODA loop and observe, orient, decide, act. But you can't do that without anticipating what's supposed to happen. And you can't follow John Boyd's OODA principle without monitoring or measuring what comes out of that. And so, in some ways, it starts with this notion of humility.
Mm-hmm.
It moves gently to a state of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And then it sort of lands with a sense of ownership. And that brings me right back to you have to start with yourself, right?
Yep.
And if you're going to assume it's other people are going to change, it's not likely going to happen, right? I don't care how good your negotiation skills are. You may be a Chris Voss acolyte, and you may read Never Split the Difference 3 times. But if you don't see yourself first as the place where change starts,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be able to model yourself like your friend. And so I'm a big fan of the extreme ownership guys, the Echelon Front, Jocko Willink, Leif Babin, and that whole team. I mean, those guys are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And, they published something recently on, accountability. And I'm always hearing leaders saying, we need more accountability, right? And man, oh man, once again, it start with self. And I feel like I'm just stumbling through the answer to your question here because there's so much to say about it. And I know we have so little time.
It is a big one. It is a big one, but I think people will appreciate even those things because that's how you start. I mean, I'm reminded, might be slightly off topic, but then again, maybe not. The report that just came out a couple of days ago about Google blaming Google's leadership. I can't remember if it was a current leader or former leader at Google actually that said this, but somebody in connected to Google's leadership said that they blamed remote work for the downturn in Google's success. And I'm going, wow, this is that's what your explanation reminds me of. That where's the humility? Where's the self-awareness? Where's just the general honesty, which is a part of humility in my book, because the data says that there is no downturn in productivity because of remote workers. Actually, remote workers actually found that they're more productive. I mean, just in general, you're eliminating anywhere from 30 minutes to 90 minutes a day in commuting and turning the vast majority of that into productivity. How in the world does that render somebody as not getting something done? I've been working remotely since 2011. I have to get out of the house to keep me from working. So, and I know a lot of people like me. It's not just me, not just the sample set of one, but that type of thing. That's the kind of thing that tells me that there's an issue when leaders have that type of a mindset. And he's not the only one. There's other companies that the same thing has happened, and they try to blame remote workers or remote work for certain lack of competitive advantage or certain lack of detrimental impact to productivity and detrimental impact to profitability and things like that. I'm going, that can't be. That can't be the case.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, I think you're right on here. I mean, the thing is they're just disavowing themselves of the personal responsibility and how they're implicated in what's happening and not taking ownership over how they're going to make it change.
Yeah. And that, to me, those are not the ingredients. Every leader is made up. I love metaphors, and I use the metaphor of soup. A goulash, if you will, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But a good soup is made up of several ingredients, and that type of leadership soup, it's got some bad ingredients in it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's not panning out well. And good leadership is going to help people to thrive, and it doesn't matter whether you're in person or remote. It doesn't matter. And the pandemic, that forced people to work remote, and companies suffered to some extent, but it wasn't because of the lack of productivity. It was because of other things. And I just wish more leaders would have that humility, have that self-awareness, have that drive to help their people be successful. And I see your wheels turning there.
Yeah, well, fortunately, we've had enough of a time to think about and talk about the essence of the answer to the question that I realize there are a couple of very specific skills that I think
Yes.
also are
Hmm.
at play here. One of them is answering questions succinctly,
Hmm.
right? If you're in a new leadership role, the quickest way to get out of that leadership role is to answer questions poorly,
Yep.
right? Tell stories when somebody wants a simple yes, no, or a fact, right? So learning precision answering, which is sort of the came out of the body of work that Dennis Matthews and Monica Werlein did at Stanford in precision questioning and answering. Like learn precision answering,
Hmm.
like understand how to manage requests and agreements effectively,
Hmm.
right? Understand how to clarify requests, understand how to make requests, understand how to have integrity around managing requests and
Yes.
agreements.
Yes.
And for God's sakes, learn how to negotiate, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. If you can't negotiate, you can't advocate. And if you can't advocate, you can't cause change. And if you can't cause change, you can't lead. And if you
Yep.
can't lead, you're not a leader.
Absolutely. And it's funny. You just mentioned a few. I'm not going to get into this part, but I mentioned my love for EQ.
Mhm.
And I've studied Adele Lynn. I've studied some of the different, she's my favorite. So, of course, I know her name. I'm terrible with names, but her name definitely I
Mhm.
know. But I have my own EQ model. And it has, everybody usually has 4 or 5 major traits. And you don't usually see anybody go beyond those 5. And not only did I have an additional 9 to 10 traits, and you just mentioned like 4 or 5 of them. One of them is the
Mhm.
ability to negotiate as being an
Yeah.
EQ trait.
Yep.
But I also have EQ red flags. I have 9 to 12 EQ red flags. And if you
Mhm.
see these things at work in yourself or someone else, then you're going to have to get to work. You're going to either, if you see it in yourself, you have to get in your to work in trying to get this out of your system, out of your persona, expunge it.
I
Or
love that.
if you see it in somebody else, then now you got to use your EQ to manage
Yeah.
because you can't see it and then run for the hills, so to speak. You may be in a relationship that's going to need management, whether it's managing up, managing down, or whatever it is. But yeah, you just mentioned those things and bring those things to light. I've got to spend some time talking about those things a little bit more
That's
on the
great.
show
Yep.
here because EQ is such a it's such the glue. It just helps hold everything together and help us to achieve. And there's a ton of leaders, they want to be in charge. They've got great business ideas, not taking that away from them. But if they don't have the EQ, there's going to be a
Yeah.
major disconnect and it's going to cost the company in profitability, competitive advantage, attrition,
Mhm.
the invisible dollars, as I like to call
That's right. Yeah.
them. So here's our last question, and we'll get to our open, the lightning round or the open topics, so to speak. But there are some people on the show. We sort of touched on this a little bit already, but there's some people listening. They're either startup founders considering launching a startup, and you once delivered a talk entitled "What I Wish I'd Known as a Startup Founder." What tips? I know this is gonna be on the Reader's Digest condensed end of things, but what tips would you offer these folks in the audience today who are very startup minded?
Wow. Great question. As usual, I think what I now believe is that it's all about priorities.
Hmm.
And I don't think I knew that before. And it turns out the answer is really simple. It turns out implementing the answer is not as simple,
Right.
which is recognizing it's about your personal priorities. It's about balancing those against the priorities of your first team. Who is it that you are part of a first team? And it's about working priorities, potentially many conflicting priorities across an organization, and wrangling these things or managing these priorities in a way that allows the stuff that's more important to float to the surface and the stuff that's less important
Hmm.
to drift to the bottom, and then have spirited, constructive debates about how to make trade offs when new things come in and disrupt all of your fine prioritization work. But the thing is, if you're in a startup, you don't have a lot of spare resources, right? We talk about
Yeah.
it in terms of strategy, right? If you had infinite resources, you would do everything,
Right.
but you don't. You've got to have an effective strategy. But how do you translate that strategy into action? You do that through your priorities, and you do that through the execution of those priorities. And that's all informed. That strategy is informed by your mission, and that mission is informed by your vision. That vision is informed by the circumstances that you uniquely see in the world as either problematic, you're trying to get away from them, or opportunistic, you're trying to go toward them to create new forms of value or new magic in the world. And therefore, what you're really trying to do is connect the vision to the mission, to the strategy, to the priorities, to the execution.
Mhm.
And you're trying to do that in a reasonably productive, methodical, intentional, deliberate way.
Phenomenal. And you just demonstrated that succinct, that succinct answer. Powerful stuff. Powerful, powerful stuff. And I know folks are going to appreciate that. So now we've reached the open topic arena. And so, what things, Harry, would you like to address? Talk about anything, any topics that are on your mind that you'd like to address right now. This is your time.
Yeah, the crazy thing is, it seems like I wrote this book, and the conclusion of the book talks about the fact that, if you've managed to read the whole book, I would challenge you to unring the bell of what I just said. Right? It's You can't see the world the same way.
Right.
But what's astonishing to me is, with as many people and as many resources and as many challenges and problems that we're facing in the world, that all talk about how important prioritization is, why aren't people busting down the door to figure this all out? Like, why is this the first book on the topic? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that, people recognize that the most effective organizations, the Apples and the Amazons of the world, they're good at prioritization pretty much, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
they rely on teams that are doing a better job at prioritizing than companies that don't have teams like that working together, figuring out, what's slowing them down, how can they speed up, how can they focus on more of what matters, and so on and so forth. And those teams are composed of individual contributors that are really making sure that they're following that advice that Roseanne gave us, to get clear about what it is that matters to us and figure out how it is we're going to make progress day in and day out. And if you get that system working,
Hmm.
magic happens, because with the synchronization that comes from individual contributors working as a part of an effective team, and those teams working as parts of teams, all working together to accomplish something bigger and more impressive and harder and more worthy, man, nothing can stop us.
Right.
Like, we just need to work together.
Right. And the thing that stood out, there's one word that stood out in everything you just said, and it was the word system.
Yes.
That word is popular in UX circles today, but I don't think people understand the power of that word. I mean, sometimes they do, but the issue of the system, having a system to approach your prioritization, is that it's repeatable. And if you understand the, I'm going to refer to it as the cognitive jurisdiction
Yeah.
of your system, then you should know where it's applicable and how you can repeat it and how you can make it efficient to repeat that and apply it to different things to make your own life, your own mode of operation more efficient. That's the element of power to me. That I'm going to throw one of my little tidbits here, and the part that the topic of your book resonates with me so much. Again, people are always asking me, Darren, how in the world do you do this, 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 and this? How in the world do you do all of these things? And how do you do them all so well? Well, because again, I mentioned earlier, if you do it or if you touch it, be excellent. Another mode of operation I have is that do it once, do it right. And there's this other issue of just making sure that in the process of doing everything once and doing it right, and if you touch it, be excellent, then there's a mindset of repeating. So there's you're going. What are you going to do? I'm going to do X. Well, how do you do X? Well, it has the same framework as the same thing I did for A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. It's so when you get into this thing where you repeat things all the time, it does become easy to do things. I love those days where, okay, there's a Saturday coming up and I want to get really, really organized this particular day and how I go about doing things. And I find out that the days that I structure, because I'm pretty well organized. And when I say that I'm going to do these things, I'm going to do this at 9:30, this at 10:30, this at 11, this at 11:15. By the time I'm done, I can get through a list of 10 things faster because of the structure. And so I take that with me everywhere I go. So everything I
that's
do.
exactly right. It is like so deeply spot on. And I don't know who told me this, but it's like practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing.
Yes.
I don't have to follow a lot of my own advice in the book anymore because I know where the shortcuts are.
Yeah.
I've got the structure I can rely on. So I can get up and I can hit hard in the morning.
Yes.
And I know, oh, got to do this. It's part of the system.
Yep.
Right. It's built in now.
Yep. Work the system. I remember somebody telling me that in business years ago. Work the system. And if the system works and you work the system, you thrive.
Yeah.
It's automatic. Yes, there's Murphy's Law. But if you work the system will account for Murphy's Law because proper prioritization and planning accounts for divergence. It accounts for the exceptions that might arise. And so when it comes up, and then after you repeat it X number of times, it's second nature.
My great challenge right now is that I'm an old white guy, bald white guy, and there's a new generation of people. They call them Gen Z, right? I don't actually know, but they read differently, they think differently, they consume content differently. I'm struggling with the question of how do I help them get to this kind of system when a book like the kind I just wrote was really the first foray of me being clear enough about what I was trying to put out there in the world, but it may not be the optimal resource for the people who need it the most now.
Yeah, I actually talked about something that this taps into my instructional design learning experience background. And one of the things I talked about in a recent show was I did a show called The Best Way to Learn. And all I did on that show, I didn't talk that much about UX as much as I was talking about the learning part of our UX journey and how we do grow and how we take information in. And years ago, I obtained 4 instructional design certifications from a company called Langevin Learning. And they drilled something in us. And of course, I brought all that stuff with me into my UX journey. And there was something that they taught me that I still, to this day, I embrace it. I talked about it on that show to the nth degree. No matter who somebody is, what generation they come from, or reside in, I should say, learning for eons has all been about 3 things. Presentation, whatever that presentation is, whether it's a book, whether it's a video, whether it's a podcast, whether it is listening to a TED Talk. No, it doesn't, whether it's a YouTube video, they all fall under the umbrella of presentation. So taxonomically, they all fall under that umbrella of presentation. So there's the presentation, the exposure to the content, the exposure to the book, to your book. Then there's application. So during the presentation, that's where they digest it, they take it in, they digest it, they ruminate, they chew the cud, so to speak, on that thing. Then there's the application. That's step 2, where they get to practice it, where they build confidence. That's where all this, and I don't know if you've heard it or not, I don't know what your stance is, but I'm very anti imposter syndrome. In that if you, there's self-doubt and there's what people call imposter syndrome, and self-doubt is a thing that does exist. And imposter syndrome was made up by 2 ladies that didn't stand up for themselves when they were rejected by their male peers. So it was concocted in a closet. It's subjective. It stays in the closet. It's not a thing. but we all experience, so every last one of us, not only have we experienced self-doubt, we're going to experience it at some time in the future, no matter who we are. The 90-year-old person in the nursing home is still going to experience self-doubt somewhere because there's something that's going to happen. It's just a thing. But when somebody takes the time to apply what was presented to them, they do it over and over again, they develop confidence, especially when they get to point 3, feedback. They apply it, they practice it, and they get feedback on how well they did. What do you need to keep doing? What do you need to do better? What can you do to get better? And so those 3 things, presentation, application, and feedback, forms this little circle, if you will. And that's how people learn, no matter what the topic is, no matter what's going on, because presentation is broader than anything else because it can come through so many different methods. But that's the thing. So Gen Z, boomers, millennials, whoever they are, it's gonna be presented in, whether it's on a TikTok, and the book is set up into 500 segments that they can short form videos that can roll out 30 seconds at a time. They'll take that, run off with it, practice it, and it may take them longer to achieve self-efficacy, but it's doable. Always through those same 3 things.
Nice, very inspiring. You give me hope.
There's definitely hope, even though sometimes it's painful, because especially when you have a big heart and you want people to get better, and everybody doesn't always buy in. It can be a painful journey because you care so much. But thank God for those who care enough to give like you did in the book, because that's just some phenomenal stuff. And I hope more people get on that bandwagon. I look for a sequel. You get to expound.
Nice. I've got a plan.
That'd be great. But Harry, this is phenomenal. I love the conversation. Love this content. I look forward to hearing the feedback that I get from people. And we're on the Kathy Ireland network now. And so we've got access to some potentially 80 million people. So we'll see how many people get to hear about this episode.
I am so looking forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely.
And hope to be able to call you a friend going forward.
Absolutely. Yes. Let me know when you want to come back on the show. Let me know when there's something that comes to mind that you want to talk about, and we'll get something on the calendar, and we'll go from there. But this is dynamite stuff, sir. So thank you for taking the time to spend time with the World of UX audience and folks. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks again to our guest, and thanks to Lou Rosenfeld for helping to arrange this. He's starting to send a lot of authors my way, and I've got 4 books on the horizon, so we'll see what happens with all that too. I got to finish my dissertation first. Dissertation first, books later. So that's the name of the game right now.
Thank you. It's been amazing.
Absolutely. So folks, again, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for taking the time to listen today. Remember, if you love the podcast is helping you, don't forget, wherever you listen to it, please leave a review. Please help people. Tell your friends. Tell folks in the UX community. Tell folks that you think will get something out of the show, because the listenership means everything to us, and it will help us in what we are trying to accomplish. So until next week, this is Darren Hood, the host of The World of UX, signing off. Happy UXing, everybody.